Welcome to the Love Your Life and Yourself podcast, the weekly show where science meets soul and mom chaos meets mind mastery. You're not just a mom. You're a woman with dreams, a career, a body that needs care, and a soul that craves more. This podcast is your permission slip to stop surviving and start thriving in motherhood, health, career, and stress resilience. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Rath, and every week we bring you actionable insights and transformative conversations to help you create a life you truly love. From evidence-based wellness strategies to authentic self-discovery, we'll explore what it takes to thrive through expert interviews and real unfiltered stories. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back, everyone. We have our first guest on Love Your Life and Yourself podcast. I'm super excited. Lona Cook here, Dr. Lona Cook. She is an author, speaker, holistic chiropractor, entrepreneur, mom. She has this passion for helping others embrace their innate power and see that interconnectedness between that physical, mental, emotional dance that we live in our physical world. And so, welcome, Lona.
So good to see you again.
Yes. So, Lona and I connected about 10 years ago. We were just talking before we hit the record button. And Lona was my first coach out of chiropractic school. And so, it's so neat to me and just amazing that she is also our first guest here on Love Your Life and Yourself podcast because I had an awakening when I first met you out of chiropractic school, especially because the school I went to was not very philosophical in the, I would say, the like non-physical form, like the energy side of chiropractic that is so powerful. And so you really opened my world to that. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. But I always start the podcast with guests with this one question is what does loving your life and yourself mean to you, Lona?
Okay, so the quote that kind of popped in my head when you said that question is that, I'm all for vacations. Don't get me wrong, I love traveling, but I think loving your life and yourself is also realizing like that every moment and every day is really a choice. So it's not like you need to escape to go on a vacation to have a great life, right? And so
Mm,
there was a quote that's kind of like build a life that you don't need to have a vacation from, essentially.
mhm,
And that to me would be what I'm trying to do, right? And that requires a lot of reflection and sometimes hard conversations with yourself about what isn't working for you and how you get to be the one that figures out how to change that. But that's worthy work if it builds a life that you're in love with, and then you transform in that process too.
I love that. It made me giggle internally because I told myself I would never marry a farmer. And my husband, we farm now. But he wasn't a farmer when I married him. So he kind of bait switched me. He was an engineer and then was like, hey, I think I want to take over my parents' farm. And I was like, I told myself, but now I'm like, "Oh, I love it." Like, I wouldn't change it for anything. I love being out in the country and stuff, but I think of him, and myself, this life that we're creating, and he doesn't wanna leave the farm. He's like, "What are your hobbies? Farming. What do you do for work? Farming." Like,
Yeah.
"What do you wanna do with family? Farming." And so it's like it's just, like, so ingrained and it's just what he wants to do. He's like, "I don't care if we don't go on any vacations, like, I'm cool. I'll go to the mountains and snowmobiling in the winter when the farm is, like, on sleep mode, but, other than that." So, it
That's
just makes me really think of him when you comment on that and really the life that, we're both kinda creating here too as we spoke earlier, but I love it. So I love to start with people's stories. I think stories are super powerful, and it makes us connect with other people. But what initially, like, I'd love kind of tell the audience like who you are, what you do, and like a little bit of your story, and what initially kind of sparked that fascination with this intersection of energy and form.
Was there a specific moment, or was this like kind of like a natural process that just kind of happened? Tell us about that.
Yeah. When you were saying about Tyler wanting Tyler, right? Is he
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. Tyler.
wanting to, stay on the farm and do farming and you're like, it was a bait and switch. I probably back when we were connecting, one of the quotes that was my favorite at the time was just like, "You wanna make God laugh, tell him
Yep.
right?" And I feel like I was just having this conversation with another chiropractor, like, the second you say, I will never
Uh-huh.
do that thing," and then you're like, "Oh, it's on a fast track to you right now."
Yep.
So for me, I thought I would never move back to my hometown, which is Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and that is where I have been firmly planted now for a while. So, when I think about my story, I, grew up on a Christmas tree farm also in Chippewa,
Mm.
Wisconsin, and had awareness to chiropractic because my family used chiropractors throughout my childhood and my life. And so I went to chiropractic school because I loved our childhood chiropractor. And I eventually realized that that was what I wanted to do, but I had no awareness to our profession. Actually, I didn't realize that a lot of people didn't know what chiropractic was really about or what it was for. They thought of it as just neck and back pain. And I think that served me well, that my awareness to chiropractic was totally different than because I was the kid that thought it was normal, just like going to the dentist is normal, right? So I find myself in chiropractic school, and towards the end of chiropractic school, I'm in that, wrestling with myself of like, where am I going to go? What type of job am I going to take? Am I going to work for someone else? Am I going to open my own practice? And this is really where my awareness to energy first started. So there was an event, and I think for a lot of people, it usually does come from an event that is challenging, that causes you to really take a hard look at something from a new perspective. So for me, I was supposed to move out to California and take a job. And I had an on again, off again boyfriend that was from California and he was already out there practicing. And I went actually to Costa Rica for a month because there was a month-long rotation you could do down there towards the end of school. And while I was down there, it was like on our third week, I had gotten comfortable in the place that we were staying, and I was gonna walk to one of the cafes that had internet, and they had told us not to go by ourselves, in broad daylight, and I just thought, "I'm fine. I'm fine." And so I walked to this cafe, and I ended up getting held up at gunpoint and, like, had to hand
Oh,
over my stuff.
wow.
And it happened super quick. Um, and what was interesting about that is I got back to the, place we were staying, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that just happened." And I was fine. And you hear the words gunpoint, it sounds sensational, but honestly, it felt like I was like out of my body in that moment. Like it was just like it happened quickly. It was probably all of a couple minutes, where I'm getting robbed, and then I go back and I'm like, well, what do I do now? And what ended up happening then is I got back into the country, so back in the United States, and I was, again, supposed to move out to California, and it was like everything was going wrong with my situation out there. From my on again, off again boyfriend, he told me he was moving back to Minnesota, and that made me mad. And so then I was like, well, I'm still going to go out there because that's what I said I was going to do. So then I was trying to find a place to live out there. It was like one thing after another was like tanking. And the woman I was working for at the time, she, on like the day before I'm supposed to move out there, she says to me, she's from Pittsburgh, by the way, so she was very direct. She was like, um, "I'm your sign. When are you gonna get it through your head that you're not meant to go out there and that you're getting all these signs to not go?"
Mm.
And I think her saying that directly to me, I had a 90-minute drive back to my parents' house after that, and I remember crying, which if you knew me at the time, I was not a crier. And so I just felt like I'm failing. Like I said I was going to do this thing. It's not working out. I don't know if I should go. I just gotten held up at gunpoint like that earlier that month. Like I was like all these weird things that were just very rocky happening. And so I got back to my mom's or my dad's, and my mom said, "Are we driving in the morning?" Because she could obviously tell that I was not in a good headspace. And I was like,
Mhm.
"I don't know. I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'll make a decision." And in my head anyways, that was the first time in my life that I'd like actually considered backing down on something and actually gave myself permission to back down because I was kind of like a bull in the china shop up until that point. Like if I said I was going to do something, I was going to do it and I would not give myself any wiggle room. So what that event catalyzed for me is over the next month, I did surrender to it. I didn't go out there. I did what I said I wasn't going to do, which was I was back at my parents' house. And there was like, it was like the record stopped at that point. It was like, and all sorts of weird stuff started to happen. Like this, I started exploring real estate to figure out if I was going to open my own practice since I was at the end of school and clearly wasn't taking the job in California anymore. And this woman called my parents' house. I didn't know her. And she just said, I heard, I know of who Lona is. And I heard she's going to maybe open a practice here. And I just wanted to volunteer my time to help her. And I'd like
Mm,
work for free. And I was like, who does that? So I meet this
mm.
woman and she's like the mom who's like totally granola and crunchy. And, like she was like the perfect first CA or first assistant. And and then like the landlord was going to work with me and I had went from this life that felt like every like moment I was hitting my head up against a wall to then in almost overnight as I surrendered into like maybe I'm not supposed to go and maybe I could back down and maybe I could do something different to like things that should have been hard felt like really fluid and easy. I'm like something's different. Something's really different happening here. And that sensation in my body was really different. Like almost like going from again, this like feeling like everything had to be a force to then everything could actually flow. And so I started to like get exposed to more conversations that had me curious about like, and I started meeting people who were talking more about energy and like, it just, it went led to now where I've just, totally drank the Kool-Aid to go down the rabbit hole and keep learning about more of like a quantum understanding of how our systems work and why my system changed so dramatically was because I allowed myself to like surrender there, which changed the energy, which then allowed what I was experiencing to radically shift. And, you know, I'll stop talking, but you get the point. That started.
No, that's amazing. And I think I can totally relate. But B, I want to go back to that point where you were in the moment of like not stepping down, right? Because I think this there's this societal, I don't know, stigma around like this perfectionism and like sticking with your word. And there is, I mean, I think people need to stick with their word even more, especially when they're talking to themselves. But also, there's this alignment with it and giving yourself permission to be like, okay, like this path is not serving me anymore. Yes, I said I was going to do this, but it's not working out for me anymore. And that's okay. So, I'd love for you to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that moment because I know there's so many people that are like, well, I said I was going to do this. I'm going to do this. That's almost like that perfectionist mode. Like, I don't want to look, whether that's from like an outside perspective of someone like judging me or even this like internal, I'm letting myself down kind of feeling. I'd love for you to kind of expand on that.
Well, now the words that I would put to it, which I probably wouldn't have had those words back then, is that before that, I had been aligned with my ego. Like I was
Mm,
aligned with having to show up the way that I thought I had to show up, or the way that my like payoff was that, well, I'm the type of person who only does it this way, or like I have to be this way that I've said I am, which is that if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And which can be okay. That I'm not saying to back down on your word. It's also like, is that from an egoic place or is that an actual,
mhm.
as you said, aligned place? Right. And for me at that point, it was more just a like, it was like a screw you place because I had told my boyfriend I was going, even though he wasn't there anymore. That was the reason I chose it, not because it was what was right for me or best for me. It was like, so that's part of it when you like think about how you make decisions. And I think this can sound really foreign to people who aren't used to thinking about this. Like, do you consider yourself in the equation and like what the like core of you, like that higher self of you actually is in alignment with, right? And if you haven't made any of those decisions in a long time, you're like, I don't even know how to find that place. Right? Well, how do you find it? Well, when do you feel best? Like, is it after a run? Is it after you get up from a nap? Is it when you're around certain people? That's the place where then you should be making those decisions from, right? And if you're in a place that feels hard, feels frustrated, feels contracted, feels angry, feels shameful, not your higher self, right? Like
Yeah.
the place to make the decision from.
Yeah. I love that. I always tell people, like, take it for a walk, right? Well, for me, walks are, like, very clearing or driving by myself with no children,
Yeah.
requesting in the back seat, like, I'll go for a drive, and normally I'm going somewhere, but, um, yeah, so where is that alignment I love that. Okay. So this um your specialty really is like seeing the energy beneath our, I would say, like external experiences of what we're living. So explain what this actually means. So maybe someone who is new to like everything has energy. You talked about quantum, experiences. And I actually was just listening to a podcast this morning. They were talking about quantum AI. And I was like, whoa, like this is a whole new level of AI that I hadn't heard about. But from your perspective, like kind of share with us how that energy actually intertwines in like real life, like physical life, I guess you could say.
Okay, so we all, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have taken some degree of science classes where we understand like a solid is particles held closer together, a
Right.
liquid is particles moving faster, gas is particles that we maybe can't even see moving so fast that now they're, if we use ice to then water to, gaseous as an example. And so particles in motion is what I want you to get is that everything on some level is particles in motion. And everything in our world is also frequency and vibration, right? So there is an essence to how the energy is moving. Again, if it's solid form, it's a slower form of that energy versus if it's like something that has more energy to it, you might not even be able to see it with your eye. Also, to remind you that our eyes only perceive a small portion of the light that's available in the electromagnetic
Yeah.
spectrum,
Yep.
right?
Like,
So, like,
think
what
of a microwave or, X-ray or even heat. You can't see heat, but you can feel it.
right. So,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of things that our minds sort of play tricks on us because we say, well, that's not real because I can't visually see it. But just keep in mind, there's a lot more happening than what we
Mhm.
actually perceive. So, the more I studied, let's just start with the body for a second. Like, our bodies actually move energy in kind of what's described as like a torus field. So, your brain, your nervous system, your spine is protecting that nervous system. The energy moves through us as a conduit, but it's moving in like, I'm going to call it a loop, right? And the earth moves in a loop. It has its own frequency. An apple, if you look at the shape of an apple, it's a vortice of energy. Like, again, this idea that the energy moved in a loop with the apple. So a lot of our 3D world is created by these loops of energy. I'm going to use that term just because it's an easy term, right? And that is created through this energy moving in a way that is organized by the frequency and vibration of that organism. Okay. So um, there's a lot of science studying this at this point, like even how a baby develops, like how does the system of the mom and the baby know where to put the eyes and the nose and the kidneys and
Mhm.
the liver and the stuff. It's
Mhm.
like likely because there is a field of energy that is differentiating the cells based on the electromagnetic field in that location to, hey, you need to turn into an eyeball here versus if that stem cells, you know a little further south, it turns into a heart, right? Like, so the reason I share this is because we have to just give ourselves permission for a minute to understand that some of this takes a lot to just like envision that everything is
Mhm.
actually energy at its core and it's all interconnected. Um, and so some of the teachers and the people I've been exposed to that have shared a lot of information with me and I've learned from help me understand that as it relates to our experience and what we are maybe experiencing in our bodies or experiencing in our world in a 3D world is directly connected also to our thoughts and our belief system and that point of connection that we have of like, am I feeling like I'm connected to my more expanded self or this place that feels like it is connected to God or whatever label you want to like, whatever word choice you want to use there? Or am I coming from a place that probably has lower energy or less energy, like a shameful place, a fearful place? And that affects our energy, it affects our bodies, right? And that certainly then is creating a field of energy around us that has electromagnetic pull that then is entangling in our 3D and 4D and 5D experience, right? So essentially, like what I want listeners or anyone listening to me is to just recognize that most of us, if we just I'm gonna say it, dumb it down for a second, is like, when you walk into a room, if somebody's been fighting in that room, right?
Mhm. Yep.
You know, if you're angry and you send an email in an angry state, probably what's the response you're gonna get back? More
Yep.
anger, right? Like we do all of this somewhat subconsciously because or like we we maybe call it woo woo or intuitive or something intuition, but this is energetics, right? And
Mhm.
I just taught CE down at Sherman College last week on energetics. And, like, let's just use that example of, let's say somebody who's in a state of anger as their dominant state, like, what do we think is actually happening to the cells in their body if that is the like energy that is coursing through that person most of the time, right? Like, does that lead to better health or worse health? Do you think
Yeah.
there's disease process in motion versus healing in motion, right?
Mhm.
But we don't talk about this stuff enough because we've tend to put things in silos. Like, oh, well, I'm angry at my brother for the last 30 years, but that couldn't be why I have liver disease. Like
Mm. Mhm.
maybe it's a component, right? Like, because that body is connected to everything going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And those cells are harmonizing because they're in that field with what is being projected, right? And that is also setting up an experience for that entire person's lens on their life, right? So it's like the attractor point. So a lot of people have heard of like law of attraction, right?
Mhm.
That's like the commonly known universal law. There's 12 of them though that tell you how energy moves in this world, right? And so essentially when we start to look for these experiences, we can see like, isn't that interesting that I was in that state and then this next thing happened, right?
Yeah.
And we don't always see the connection there. I'm going to give you one story because this is my funny one that I usually tell people. Okay. So, as an example, some people might think I'm crazy based on drawing this parallel, but that's okay. So, in 2020, I was pregnant with my second son, and I was supposed to have a home birth with the same midwife that I had had my first son. And remember, 2020, not a time that you wanted to go to a hospital or anything like that, right? So,
Mhm. Yep.
so Max, who, I hadn't met yet, obviously still in my tummy, I was 38 weeks pregnant and my midwife calls me and she says, Lona, I am having my own health challenges right now. I'm not going to make it to your birth. I don't think you're going to have to go with the other midwife in the area. And my first birth was a really long birth. And so Karen, my midwife, was my like rock. Like she got me through that. So I was like, oh, I don't think I can do this without you. Like that was like my internal talk. So I was fearful, but I was also like super frustrated because I also didn't want the other midwife who I knew was masking. And I was like, I am not going to mask at my own birth. Like, this is insane. There's
Mhm.
whole dialogue happening in my head of frustration and anger and fear and all that. So my first son was born at 38 and a half weeks. I'm 38 weeks pregnant thinking this baby's coming any day, right? My midwife is now not going to be there. So I'm driving to this new midwife's house to go meet her, frustrated, all the things. My son is in the back seat and he says, "Hey mom, how fast does this car go?" And that was my nudge, right? I totally didn't listen to him. I just said, I don't know, Jack, fast. And I am angry, frustrated, driving fast. So, the next thing that happens is I get pulled over. I get a major ticket, right? And I realized that was the embodiment. That was like the actual, like, showing up in the 3D world. The first nudge was him just saying, "Hey, mom, you better slow down," basically, by saying, like, "Did you realize how fast this car is going?" I didn't listen. I kept going in my frustration, my whatever. I get pulled over. I had to laugh because I'm like, okay, this is literally the universe, God, whatever, telling me, slow your roll, right? Like you're on momentum for not good things right now, right?
Mhm.
And so I laughed, and Jack in the back seat also was like, Mom, Dad, and I will break you out of jail. And so, I thought it was humorous at that point. Obviously, didn't think it was humorous having to pay a big fee and drive really well for the next year or two, but um, I realized, like, I got to change. I got to get back to my center point, that connected state, and realize everything's going to work out because I can't control all of this. I can only control my response to things, right? Well, what ended up happening was I went 41 weeks with Max. He was born at home with my normal midwife. Everything was all great. It was a beautiful birth. Everything turned out. But I don't think that would have been the case had I not gotten myself back to that place internally where I'm full of, like, gratitude or ease or peace, just like not getting myself all in a tizzy of all these things. So many of times we don't control our state, right? Like we get really worked up, we stay worked up, and now we're attracting all these circumstances that are a match for anger, fear, grief, shame, guilt, you name it. Doesn't mean we all don't experience those at times. We just don't want that to be our dominant experience that we're living our life through, and is polarizing more of that experience to us, right?
That's so good. Yeah. I can totally relate to that story of slowing down. There was a moment in my life that I got pulled over 4 times in a month. And I was like, "Okay, God, like, slow down. I get it. Like, I am pushing too hard and trying to do too many things at once." And I think, what, like, the hard part to actually implementing is we think we have to, like, do more. Like, it's all about the doing, and it honestly wasn't until probably the last, like, 9 months of my life where I truly realized, like, it is in that awareness of that mindset shift of, "Holy crap, I didn't realize I was having these thoughts so many times." Like, that awareness just wasn't even in there, that state. Like, what comes to me is, um, m after having faith, I was in, like, the faith is only 2, but I was in, like, the worst health ever, and I was constantly tired. I was fatigued every single day. I was tired. I woke up tired, went to bed tired, didn't matter how much I slept. But I realized I was like, put a stake in the ground. And it was like this awareness of I said I was tired 20 times before I left the house. And like, no wonder why I was like attracting all of this essentially fatigue and energy. And that awareness is really what energy is all about. Like, I think that is people think they're like, "Okay, yeah, what do I do about it?" Which, maybe you could speak to this is a lot of, most of our listeners are women, but a lot of women struggle to connect with that intuitive state that we have. Um, or they are able to, but they just ignore it. Like it's like, Jack, "Hey mom, how fast does this car go?" Like, ah. Or we're not even in a state. I think it comes back to that awareness. Like we're not even aware that we're in that state. But then the universe kind of and God gives us all these signs. But for these women that are like, okay, yes, I am stuck. I have high anxiety. Anxiety specifically. I see that probably the most in my women that I see. Um, so that struggle in this chaos or what they perceive as chaos. So what are some simple yet I would say effective ways that we can start to navigate that awareness and underlining like energy gap or tap into that energy that you see in women.
Yeah. I love that you started that question with like, we feel like we have to do, right? And do is action. And sometimes it's aligned action, and that's great. But many times we have been taught to just do without actually getting back to that center point, or even like thinking about things, right? It's like we're just habitually doing without actually like trying to look for some awareness. So my point with that is like, how many times, let's use weight for an example. How many times do people maybe yo-yo their weight, right? Like, oh, I'm always on a diet and then I lose weight and then I go back up and then I go back. And the part that's missing, they're doing things to lose weight, but the connection of like, what did the weight represent in the first place? And what is this like protective barrier that I keep going back to when I keep putting more weight back on, right?
Mhm.
Is a
Yep.
part like the awareness of like, if my body, my life, always trying to show me something or teach me something or have me tune into something, am I actually looking for it? And like, am I asking myself the question? So, when we start to see patterns in our life, which is the first thing, is to start to look for the pattern of I always feel tired, or the pattern of I'm even saying the words out loud, I'm always tired, right? Like that's a pattern you became aware of, right? And I think that's the starting point, is to just have enough of a moment that you pause to actually know to ask the question of like, wait a second. Like something here is seemingly a pattern. Why is this pattern happening? Right? Patterns, we go back to the energetics, right? Patterns are in everything, right? From like the rings on the tree to the pattern of the seasons to the like sun coming up and the moon then following. Like, so and that's the energetics of our external world in order, because there's electromagnetic in all of that too. But our lives have that too. The pattern of, when my husband does this, I always get upset. Or the pattern of like, my kids
Mhm.
push this button, which is a button that my mother had and her mother had. And it's an
Mhm.
energetic pattern that's been passed on. And instead of maybe responding the exact same way, like, could I ask myself the question of what if that didn't bother me? Or what could I do differently so that I have more resiliency to that pattern? To me, that's the point, is like, if we understand that anything that we're experiencing in our life is somehow meant for us, otherwise we wouldn't be experiencing it. That doesn't mean that we have to love it or want to continue it. It means that if somebody's going to make a change, the only place of power is to realize you in this moment have choices to make. And part of that choice might mean that you're even willing to look at it and have awareness to it. So you can start to ask better questions about, how could I either shift a belief system, a mental pattern, a physical thing I'm doing that's leading to this? Like, because we are in 3D bodies, we do have thoughts and patterns and belief systems that many times have been passed down to us that we're not even conscious to. Um, and we are existing in a world that runs by these laws of energy. We've just never been taught that. Right. So it sounds daunting.
Yeah.
So where do you start? Well, you
Mhm.
start with actually tuning in and asking yourself the question, and then looking for the things that actually prove the opposite, right? Like, meaning, like, if I'm always tired, which I think a lot of moms go through those periods potentially where they're like, I am burnt, right? Like I am.
Yep.
And then you've got to ask yourself the question too of like, but are there moments where I don't feel that way? Oh yeah, they're few and far between, but this, and this, like that brings me joy when I'm doing this. Or I have more energy, it seems like, if I do this other thing, or if I'm around said other person, like, okay, well, what about that is bringing me energy? Okay, how could I bring more of that into my daily rhythms? Or, whatever it is, right? And maybe, you and I before this call were even talking about like how much we're working in our practices and not like, maybe is like there a belief system of how I'm supposed to be showing up that actually, like, I don't know where I got that from, but I could actually change how much was stacked on me. And I'd have to give myself permission for that to change,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
But I'm the one
Yep.
holding the permission card, right?
Mhm.
I think for women, that's a big one, is like we either didn't even know we could give ourselves different permission, or we're living by sets of rules that we don't even know where they came from.
Yeah. Yeah, I look back on, like, generational things and, you know, how some people's patterns, they go back. Like, you were taught that as a kid, so why would it be any different? Or my mom had this or my dad had this, so I'm gonna have this. And so I think noting on that is huge, and which kinda leads me to like this conception around or in my opinion misconception around energy. Like this sounds like too easy, right? It sounds like, oh, if you just change your thoughts, if you just start like being voodoo and having, oh, I'm going to think of all the good things, like, ignore all the bad things, and it just sounds like too good to be true, right? Like this energy work. But like from a personal standpoint, when you actually start changing these things, you're like, holy crap. Like I didn't realize how much it had an effect on that. And I was giving a similar talk. I talked more about the thoughts and the energy around the thoughts, but how our thoughts create that reality because thoughts are the precursor to the emotion. The emotion gives us the action, and then the action gives us the result. And then there's that like sequence of our experiences, and how we perceive that experience will ultimately give us the thoughts, which all thoughts, all emotions have energy. And again, that energy trickles down into your action and then your result. So when I think about like when I was talking, there was some feedback I got like, no, like this is just it's too simple. So what's the biggest misconception that you see about energy work or your understanding from this dynamic of yeah, like how it actually is simple, not always easy, right? But simple.
Yeah, it is simple and yet not easy. Like when people poo-poo it on some level, I think it is a form of self-sabotage because there's a lot of work
Mhm.
to be done, like truly, like guttural work most of the time of like, who do I believe I am? Is it okay for me to actually rewrite some of these things that maybe nobody in my lineage has ever course corrected before, right? And what does that mean? Does that make like, do I still love my family if I don't want to live the same exact way that
Right?
some
Yeah.
of us think, right? Like this is hard
Mhm.
stuff. It's hard stuff because again, we haven't been conditioned to even know that we could rewrite some of these scripts. So what I find, let's just use the example of I was just on a call before this, a coaching call with one of the women chiropractors that I work with, and she was I love working with her because she gets vulnerable, and that makes it a lot easier to help her change things because she's like, when I hear this, and we were talking about she's trying to transform her practice where she would run more from a CEO standpoint instead of being the one that's carrying the full load of so many different things in her office, right? And she has a
Mhm.
very busy office. So there is a lot of reasons and a lot of doing that she could make the excuse of, I had to see all these people, I had to do this or I had to do that. And she then is just putting out fires after fire after fire. Versus if she just reorganized how she thought about the priority of things, like the most important work is to spend this time with herself, not seeing patients, not training her team right in this moment because she's unrooted to like where the team actually should be spending their effort and their energy and who should be doing it. And she has to get clear of what her team is trying to build and who she needs to show up as. And then she goes in and does those things, right? And she's like, she's like, I hear you. She's like, there's a part of me that is like fearful that if I show up that way, what if nobody wants to like work with me? Like what if I wasn't the one doing all the things? Like, would they still want to show up for work? Would they still, value me if I'm not the one in there doing all of that? If I was the one behind the scenes? And I'm like, this is the stuff, right? Like that's just an example, but whatever your thing is that you make up in your mind that if I changed, this person wouldn't get on board or this person, couldn't handle it without me doing things this way. That's the stuff that keeps us stuck. And that's the like belief system and the like thought process that actually could be rewired. right? A personal example of that is like after my mom passed a few years ago, I really like was exploring like some of these conditioned things of like how I show up as a woman, how I show up in a marriage, how much fulfillment is there. And, I had been vocalizing some of what I needed to my husband for a lot of years. And sometimes it was heard. Most of the time, there was not a lot of action around it. And I realized that I was the problem on some level, even though I liked to project that he was the problem. That my problem was I would say things, but my actions said another, right? Like I would say I need this, but if someone else didn't pick up the slack, who would go in and do it? Me.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And and how many times do we know like we're saying one thing and we're doing another, right? We're out of alignment, we're out of integrity. And so after my mom passed, it was like, a, a big dose of cold water to me of realizing like there was a lot of things that I got to pull myself back and look for some patterns. Like, where am I showing up like her mom? And where did she probably create some of the dis-ease in herself by showing up and doing one thing or saying one thing and doing another, right? Because that leads to a lot of not good things long term, right? And and what I realized is that if I was going to like have the marriage I wanted to have and a family life like I wanted to have, there was a lot of stuff that were out of balance for us. And I needed to stop doing the parts that I was contributing to like getting what we were getting. Right. And so I didn't know when I kind of put my foot down of like some of this stuff isn't working for me. And I've talked about it and I've tried to be nice about it, that I actually needed to show up and then hold a line for myself. And it was really uncomfortable. There was 6 months there in our marriage where I didn't
Mhm.
know if we were going to like for real get divorced this time or what was going to happen, because we had that conversation before, but never actually like amounted to anything. And we
Mhm.
lived in a really weird space for 6 months. But what I realized is that one of the action steps I needed to do was I actually needed to like take myself away from the situation of like, well, he just expects that if I have this conversation, then in 2 days she's just going to do what she normally does and either pick up
Right.
the slack or
Yep.
do the things he wants me to do, let's just say sex, right? Like that it's like, no, this is a two-way street. And some of these things aren't, you know, going back and forth, right? And so when I pulled those things away, it was fascinating and it was touch and go for a while, but he totally changed. But he didn't change because he changed. I changed. And therefore how he showed up changed, right? Like I wasn't doing it
Mhm.
to change him. I just wasn't going to be out of integrity with myself and going against what I actually felt anymore. And then what happens is then the 3D world changes around you. Now you don't control how that change is going to show up. And that's the point is like when you had brought up the anxiety piece of this is I think a lot of anxiety is just trying to manipulate the future and control the future and a lot of fear over what might be happening in the future. So, part of the work there is just to remind ourselves none of us have a magic wand. So all we can do is really try and bring ourselves back into the present moment and do what we can do in the present moment, which is control our state. Like we can only ever change who we are showing up as in response to what's right in front of us, right? Of
Mhm.
and intentionally do things to hopefully set our future up in a good way, but we really only ever have control over like how we're showing up in the right now, right?
Totally true. I can 100% relate to that, like, okay, something's gotta give. Like, when you hit that point of, like, I'm not okay, and things are either gonna go way south and change, or maybe not even a bad way, but, like, things are drastically gonna change, or we gotta work on this, and similar concept with, Tyler and I, when we first got married, like, he wasn't farming, we were transitioning more onto the farm a couple years in, but I used to be like I'm still a little spicy sometimes, but, like, I used to be pretty hot-headed. You knew me back then. I feel like I'm far more, like, balanced, like, have, like, a lot more stability in my mental emotional state, and during harvest and planting, he's gone a lot. Like, he's out in the field planting a lot, and I used to get, like, so mad, and I would play these stories in my head. I remember, like, angrily chopping dinner and,
Yeah.
like, "Oh, he's so selfish. He's gone all the time. I have to take care of the kids by myself. And like you play this story on repeat and he walks through the door and you just start like, you've already played it in your head. Like, right? That thought, that energy, and you just start hammering it. And he's like, whoa, like, what did that like? He was just in the tractor minding his own business. Like he had no idea that I was, you know, like forming this 2-hour fight ready for him when he walked through that door. And now it's like he's still gone during harvest and planting. Nothing has like actually quote changed, but I am a completely different wife. Like I decided I was like, well, I can either pick a different lifestyle, which I don't want. I love this lifestyle. And every lifestyle has like, hard and challenging times, but it was the mindset around it. It's like, okay, I have some extra time to myself. Like how because he's not home. Like, yes, I do have to do the kids stuff by myself, which is a lot of freaking work. But like how can I change this mindset, this energy around a circumstance that I cannot control? Because me being pissed was me trying to control him. Like, yeah, which I mean, you can't. Like, you have to put seeds in the ground for them to grow, like as a farmer, and that just takes time. So I love that.
Control 'em, it just made you both miserable.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I love that story that you shared with your husband because I feel like I was in the same boat not that long ago. So,
I think so many of us go through, whether it's farming or, my husband was gone every other weekend because he has I have older children. And so, like, there was, again, like, where you, like, think intellectually, you know what marriage is gonna be like or partnering with someone is gonna
yep.
be like, and then you get in the thick of it and you add some kids to it and you add work and you add life and bills and, like, all of a sudden you're like, "Whoa, I gotta do some deep reflection of, like, who am I? What's gonna work for me? What's not gonna work for me?" As well as, like, the permission sometimes of, like, I need to call uncle and I need to, like, have either more support maybe from the spouse
Mhm.
or other support, like, "Hey, we really need a house cleaner, and we really need some of these other things, otherwise, I'm gonna lose my shit," right? Like,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
actually allow yourself to make those changes, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So I always like to close up with the similar question of how we open. So, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to the audience trying to love their lives and themselves more fully?
Ask yourself the question of, like, "What do I want to experience here?" Right?
Mm,
And that's maybe easy on the days where you have time to get yourself ready in the morning and drink your coffee or work out or whatever you do. But, in the throes of something that's really hard, you can ask yourself that question too. Like when my mom was passing, it was a really interesting journey with a lot of really terrible things. And I beat myself against that rock for quite a while of like not experiencing life in a good way.
mm,
Eventually, I think the gift that it gave me was to realize like I could still make that choice right then, even when I knew that, my mom was gonna die and that I couldn't change that and different things like that. It was just like, what what is meant for me here? And what do I want to experience in this? And when you look for something, I was like, maybe I'm supposed to learn something here. Maybe
mhm,
witness this. It gives you a different gift than if we're always looking at things like it shouldn't be happening or it's all wrong or, what have you. And so I think that allows you to sometimes even remember that the like really challenging stuff is a gift for your transformation, which allows you to step into more of a life that you're actually going to feel aligned with, as well as who you're becoming. You get to rewrite that story. And some of the stuff that maybe we've told a story that kind of keeps us stuck, we can tell that story differently. We can start to change the way that we maybe relate to that story.
mhm. Yeah, I try to ask that question like, what do I want? Like, what truly do I want? And we before the podcast, we were talking like, what's your goal with the podcast? And part of my goal was to talk to really cool people. Like, I love that. And so like continuing to ask that question, even on a daily basis, is like, what do I want? And I think for some people, that's a really hard question to answer because they haven't actually ever asked themselves that. They've been just pouring into their kids or their family or their work or their life for so long. They don't even really know what they want. And I think that's okay, but like, do you want to stay there, right? Like you said earlier, is it's okay to have these feelings and, to feel angry and grief and sadness and anxiety. It's okay to have moments of that, but like, do we want to stay in that state? And I think truly getting to that question of like, what do I want? Like, and taking it for a walk or, working out with it or, being in that mental state to truly answer that is a powerful question. So,
Being open.
yeah. Thank you, Lona. Where can all of our guests find you? You have books out, you speak, you coach. So,
Right.
where can everyone find you?
Probably the easiest place is just to go on my Instagram. So Dr. Lona Cook on Instagram. And then you can see my stuff is linked in there too. So I have a book called Reclamation. That is a lot of what we were talking about. And that's what I wrote it for, is just knowing that I went through a lot of change. So we never stop changing, right? But
Mhm.
I wanted to share so much of what I got to unpack for myself, because I think learning through other people's stories is helpful and relatable. Um, and yeah, I love sharing this message of starting to look at a lot of what brings us vital health is not so different of what brings us vital success and abundance and all these different things. Because if we learn how to really look for energy, we can look where it's off in how we're applying it to our bodies and our health and our well-being, as well as like our finances, right? So that's part of
Mhm.
what I geek out on now, is like helping people understand that when you really truly look for these things and start to learn how to apply it and start to geek out on it, then you can start to really apply it to many, many, many parts of your life and improve them. Mhm.
Love it. Thank you. And those will all be found in the show notes as well. So
Yeah,
if
I
you need to find it, they're there. So thank you very much, Lona. It was so great to connect.
Yeah, you too. I'm excited for your podcast and your book and all the stuff that you're putting out. So thanks
Ah,
for having
thank
me.
you. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Love Your Life and Yourself. I hope today's episode gave you one more tool or one more truth to help you thrive in your health, happiness, and resilience. Remember, loving yourself isn't selfish, it's leadership. And it's the foundation for building a life that actually feels like yours. If this spoke to you, hit that follow button, leave a review, and send it to a friend who needs to hear it. And if you want to dive even deeper, grab a copy of my #1 best-selling book, Love Your Life and Yourself. It's the heart behind this podcast, and it's helped thousands of women step into a life they actually love. You can find it at drashleyrath.com or through the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care of you and keep choosing to love your life and yourself.